Aiy-yu-kwee, Nekna Melita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be doing a Choose Your Fellowship book tag, essentially a Lord of the Rings themed book tag. This tag was created by Beth over at Booksnest. This was created for the Tolkien along that herself, Ashley from A Frolic Through Fiction, as well as Lauren from Fiction Tea. So this was created last year in September of 2020 for their Tolkien along. Basically, it was a read along to read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the remainder of 2020. I just finished watching the Hobbit movie trilogy for the first time, as well as doing a rewatch of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy with my partner. It was his first time for both of them, so that was exciting. So I'm very much in the mood for more Lord of the Rings, so I thought this would be perfect. The first question in the tag is Freddo. I will take it. I will take the ring to Mordor. And this is to choose a book that you're not sure if you liked or not, because it's Freddo. We just finished the last movie last night, and my partner has been pretty silent throughout the whole movies, all the movies. The credits started rolling for the last one, for The Return of the King. His immediate response was, Sam's too good for Freddo, and I wholeheartedly agree. For this question, I'm going to answer with the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This is a Grady Hendrix book and has been talked a lot about, I feel like. Has and has not been discussed a whole lot on BookTube. I know that everyone was like really excited for it at the beginning of the year, and then I kind of just see bits and pieces throughout the rest of the year about this book. So I picked it up. This was my first Grady Hendrix. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to read from him again, as I believe this was my first delve into horror. I don't typically read horror. 2020 was the first for that, and this was the first one I picked up. If you don't know, this book follows Patricia Campbell, who's a housewife in a suburb, and this is set in like the 90s. She and a couple of other housewives end up creating a book club, and they read like true crime and that they don't necessarily tell their husbands about because it's unsettling books. But when her neighbor ends up attacking her and like biting her ear off only to then die, someone moves in next door, and Patricia is like curious about him as he starts inserting himself into her life and into her friends' lives. There's something sinister going on, and she feels the need to expose him for what he is, which is a monster. But no one's really believing her. So it's up to her to try to get people on her side and try to get him out of their community. This book was intense. This book has multiple scenes in it where there's like, it almost feels like Grady Hendrix is just kind of throwing scary stuff at you. Throughout this book, Grady Hendrix is like doing a different scare tactic. It's at one point creepy crawlies, and another point there's someone's shadow on the roof and you can hear them walking on it. That one freaked me out, definitely. But then there's like psychological stuff in terms of no one believing Patricia, not even her own husband, who deems her as crazy. It was really frightening. And not only that, but like children are disappearing, but the children who are disappearing are coming from a community of minority people. So the police are writing off these disappearances as they just happen, and no one's really caring for it aside from Patricia, who everyone else is like, but why? And that's frightening to me, like that bit, and the fact that there's this sense of just dread and claustrophobic feeling when no one believes Patricia and no one wants to help. So I thought this book had really good discussions in it, but at the same time, what was scaring me was that some of the reviews that I was seeing for this book was saying like it was set in the 60s. There's no one that like would deal with that kind of husband anymore. It's like, unfortunately, no, that's not true. After working in a nonprofit agency that helped domestic violence victims, I can say for certain there are multiple women who still have to deal, who are in relationships such as this. Plus, this is the 90s. Even if it doesn't happen anymore, that was like, what, 10 years ago? 20 years ago. Holy shit. So it's still happening. And the fact that people are just like, oh, like women wouldn't like stand for that anymore. It's like, no, unfortunately, we still have that. And we still have a community within the US, and I'm sure in the world, but I can only speak for the US, that would look at the disappearances of minority children and just shrug it off as something that just happens. That to me was the scariest part of this book, and something that I feel like are discussions that need to be had and continue needing to be had. Everything else in here was just unsettling, and I can't say I necessarily enjoyed this book at all because of how it made me feel. It's a gorgeous cover. It's one that doesn't make me feel clean at all, and there's multiple sections in here, not just from the creepy crawlies or the psychological thrillers of it, but also just like there's potential, there's like rape, there's like this, it doesn't make me feel good. So I always look at this going, do I really want this book in my house? But at the same time, I feel like, question 2 is Sam, I can't carry it, but I can carry you. Oh, Sam. This one is to pick a book that you are forever loyal to. Do you know which one I'm going to choose? I feel like you do. Aiy-yu-kwee by Darcy Little Badger, illustrated by Ravina Kai. Yeah, I feel like I talk about this book, but at the same time, I feel like I don't talk about it enough. So Aiy-yu-kwee follows Ellie, who is 17-year-old, Lipan Apache, asexual, and her cousin ends up dying. She has a dream about her cousin, and he tells her that he didn't die in a car accident, that he was murdered, and asks her to protect his family and figure out why he was murdered. So Ellie and her family and friends go and protect his family and try to figure out what's going on in his town, because something sinister is definitely going on. This book was so lovely. It is a type of fantasy, same world, except that creatures of cultural lore exist. So Ellie can raise ghosts of the dead. She doesn't with humans, but she will with animals. So she has a ghost dog animal companion who's absolutely adorable, and her best friend is a descendant from an elf king. As much as I love that in general, I love also the fact that Darcy Little Badger was also able to weave in American history with that, so that it's not just that there's creatures of cultural lore running about, but how different cultures have affected others. So how colonization has affected indigenous creatures of lore, how that's kind of taken over, how fairy rings are now a sense of travel, but have like security and everything. It's very interesting, and I absolutely love that. The amount of depth that is in this world is amazing. She also just wonderfully balances humor with heavy topics of discussion, as well as I didn't know what I was getting into going into this book, and I absolutely loved it. There were times that it came up where it's like there's creatures and how they are affected by certain rules of the land, and it was just amazing to hear some of this. This was my favorite book of 2020. It's one of my top books I read of all time, so yeah, I am definitely loyal to this book. Question 3 is Pippin. But what about Second Breakfast? I absolutely love Pippin. And for this one, it's what's a book that you want to reread? And appropriately, I want to reread The Hobbit. If you've seen the books series that I need to finish, Lord of the Rings is part of it. I'm including The Hobbit in with the trilogy, even though it's not necessarily a part of it. The Hobbit is written for a younger audience, so it's a bit easier to get into than the Lord of the Rings trilogy is. This is my little pocket edition. It's the only edition that I have. I read this probably 3 or 4 years ago and absolutely loved it. This one follows Bilbo Baggins. If you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, is Frodo Baggins' uncle. And Bilbo Baggins lives an ordinary life in the Shire, and up until 13 dwarves come storming into his hobbit hole and kind of take over and whisk him off onto a grand adventure, gain treasure, and fight a dragon. Other adventures ensue along the way, but of course they need Bilbo because 13 is an unlucky number. This is Bilbo's story. I remember absolutely loving it. I would like to reread it. I did watch the Hobbit trilogy movie, the movie trilogy this month, which was something that I also had wanted to do, was kind of read books that have a movie adaptation just to kind of compare it. And it took me a while to actually get into the movies because, of course, I read this and then I heard about the movies and was really frustrated at the fact that they created 3 movies because I could not think of why there would be a need for 3 movies. Now I understand it, but now I really want to reread this. I've been wanting to reread it. Question 4 is Mary. We're going with you, Freddo. And this is a book about friendship, and actually this is a series that I'm gonna recommend, and that is Akata Witch and Akata Warrior by Nnedi Okorafor. These two are absolutely fantastic in my opinion. I did read them this last year via audiobook through my library, and then immediately bought their physical copies because it's gonna be a reread at some point. So this follows Sunny Nwazwe. She was born in America and her family decides to move back to Nigeria. Except after spending time in America, Sunny has an American accent. She's also albino, so she is picked on a lot in Nigeria. She's also a girl and with 2 older brothers, so there's certain things that are expected of her that aren't of them. So when she finally does end up meeting some friends, she finds out that they're not exactly normal either, and they in turn help her figure out that she is one of them. She is a leopard person. A leopard person is someone that is able to wield magic. They have to help solve a mystery / defeat a villain that is out there killing children for a sinister plot. So that's the summary of the first one. I absolutely love the imagery in here. It is absolutely fantastic. It was so fun to just be immersed in this world that Nnedi Okorafor has created. There are stories within stories in here, which I absolutely loved, particularly in... I think Akata Witch is a little stronger than Akata Warrior. However, Akata Warrior I absolutely loved as well. There's a giant spider and there's storytelling involved, and I absolutely loved it. Sunny ends up finding friendships in unexpected places and kind of learns how to rely on those friends with different abilities than her and learn about not only herself but them, and I absolutely loved it. Question 5 is Aragorn for Frodo. Book with their hero, heroine to swoon over. I chose one with both, and that is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is also a 2020 release. In particular, I'm thinking of Jyla, and Serapia. Would you consider them heroes or heroines? That's a gray area, but everyone in here feels like they're in a gray area. And it really just depends on the perspective you're looking at. There is a winter solstice that is coming up, and on this winter solstice there is supposed to be a solar eclipse. In this fantasy world that is inspired by pre-Columbian Americas, Rebecca Roanhorse creates this vivid world in which there are clans, there are priesthoods, there's this political intrigue where we're not sure how the tides are turning because there's corruption in one and there's something being planned in the other, but we're only getting bits and pieces of both. Question 6 is Legolas, a book that only still counts as one, and that is your biggest book on your TBR. And this, for me right now, is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I'm not entirely sure what this is about. I know it has political intrigue. I know it has LGBTQ representation. I believe there's sapphic relationship in here. And dragons, and that's all I need to know. That's all I want. But this is a chunker. I've heard nothing but good things about it aside from the size. But aside from that, like, I'm excited to eventually get to it, but that size intimidates me. The 7th question is Gimli. Shall I Get You a Box? And this is a short but fun read. And for that, I will have to go with The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Another book to movie adaptation. I did watch the movie before reading the book first. This is the one with Cate Blanchett, and which is appropriate for this, as well as Brad Pitt. And basically what the book follows is this boy who is born an old man and kind of lives his life in reverse. So he is born with cataracts, with arthritis, his skin is all wrinkly, and his hair is just all white and wispy. And as the days progress and years progress, he turns into like a grumpy old man who needs a cane to walk, to an adult that can stand up straight and works hard. It's just a fun little book, and if you have the chance to read or to watch the movie, I highly suggest that too. I love them both so much. Question 8 is Boromir. They've taken the little ones, a book series that you only made it to the first one, and that would be The Poppy War by Aiy-yu-kwee. This one follows Rin, who, in order to escape a life that she doesn't want, she takes a task that gets her into a prestigious war academy, and she ends up being picked on, and like just kind of no one has passion for her because she is dark and she comes from a poor family. She also comes from one of the most southernmost areas. This book is based off of Japanese-Chinese history, particularly the rape of Zan King. Rin is realizing that she's able to access the powers of a god, and though she wants to use that in order to prevent a third Poppy War coming, the god has other plans. So I did read this one. It took me a couple of years to read it just because the size intimidated me. I do hope to reread this one so I can get further into the series. The 3 books are out right now. I do have The Dragon Republic, and I believe The Burning Gods just recently came out this year as well. I want to reread this because I feel like a reread would help benefit me in terms of details and my thoughts and feelings on it. If you haven't read this yet, I do caution you that because there is war in it, Aragorn did base this off of a war that did happen between China and Japan, and some of the inspiration from it is in here, so there is content warnings. So I do highly suggest that you look into that before going into this. And finally, Gandalf. All we have to do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us. A book that made you think about your life, the universe, everything, once you finish reading it. Honestly, it's been a while since I've read this, but it did make a pretty big impact on me. That was American War by Omar El-Akkad. This one, I have to remember now, is a dystopian of sorts that is based in 2074. And we follow Sarat Chestnut, who is born in Louisiana. And yeah, so this one is a dystopian of sorts in which we follow Sarat, who ends up who's 6 years old when in 2074 the war breaks out. Basically, the southern states of the United States break off and create a civil war within the United States, and it's called like the oil war or something because the rest of the United States bans the use of crude or of oil. And this book kind of just shows the aftermath of that, of like the lack of food, the lack of resources, how many refugee camps there are within the United States, and how despite one side winning, that not everyone necessarily won, that essentially the world is still suffering and people are still holding grudges. So this one definitely once I finished reading it and put it down, just made me go, what are we doing with this world? Like, oh my goodness. I've been wanting to reread this because I absolutely loved it when I did read it a couple years ago. However, given the current state of our of the United States, I feel like that would be hitting a little too close to home right now. So much like how I'm kind of avoiding books dealing with a pandemic, I don't necessarily want to get into anything with with government right now. So or dystopians of any sort, really. But I did absolutely love this when I read it. I absolutely love the cover of this. This was an intense book, and I think even my partner read it shortly after I did, and he absolutely loved it. So it's a book that we both like to discuss every so often. So, and that is the Choose Your Fellowship book tag. If you haven't done this yet, consider yourself tagged. If you have done this, or if you're going to do it and you've posted it, like put it in the comments, because I am intrigued about it. I love Lord of the Rings. The movies anyway. I do hope to get to the books eventually. I have not read them yet. That is it for today. I hope that you are all in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I will talk to you again soon. Cheerio.